Hello, my name is Randy Kluver, and it's my privilege to serve as the Associate Provost and Dean of the School of Global Studies and Partnerships at Oklahoma State University. It's our privilege to host on campus today Dr. Benjamin Ho, who is an assistant professor at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. I've known Dr. Ho for many years, and we have kept up through the years, and he is currently finishing a Fulbright program at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and is a scholar of international relations, particularly China's relationship with the international order. He'll be speaking this evening on Southeast Asia and competition between China and the United States. And so we wanted to take a few minutes to get to know Dr. Ho and hear a little bit about how his research helps us better understand the world. So, Benjamin, welcome to Stillwater.
Thank you.
I take it it's your first time to Oklahoma?
Yes, it is the first time.
Welcome to Oklahoma and to Oklahoma State University. It's a privilege to have you here.
Thanks for inviting me.
How have things been in Washington, D.C.? Was it what you expected it would be?
Yes, I mean, it has been an extremely productive Fulbright stint, 3 months, notwithstanding the Omicron surge in December. I managed to get a lot of very interesting interviews, some of them in person, some of them online. So I think it really allowed me to understand the United States. I wouldn't say understand totally, it's far from that, but at least it's one thing reading about the U.S. in the media, it's another thing coming to Washington, D.C. and to sort of see the United States. But having said so, as you mentioned earlier, Washington, D.C. is not the United States. So this has been a great opportunity to also come to Oklahoma, even for these 2 days. And in the course of these 3 months, I've also made some road trips. So it really gave me an opportunity to sort of see the United States beyond what I just read.
Sure.
In the papers.
Well, that's an interesting comment. What is your biggest takeaway? What has maybe been the biggest surprise to you that you've learned?
Well, one of the lessons or one of the key takeaways in this project is I've realized that the United States, so there are at least 2 points. The first is that it is a country that places a lot of emphasis on freedom and the idea of a liberal international order. And that is very fundamental to how the Americans view themselves as human beings. It's almost so part of this challenge with China, which I'll talk about this evening, is really about the clash of how they view this issue of freedom and individual rights and things like that. So that's the first point. The second thing I've sort of learned, I mean, I've read it also, but it's also realized there are a lot of deep divisions in United States society. I mean, you've got differences over vaccines, wearing of masks, and basically a lot of policies have been debated. And so I think that is the other part of the United States, which I knew in theory, but I didn't realize how these divisions were being played out in daily life until I was here.
Yeah. Well, you've come at a dramatic time. I mean, with the rise of the coronavirus, of course, a lot of deep divisions have been exposed, and I would say in some ways deepened between different parts of the United States. And in Oklahoma, we tend to be a very conservative state, and there's a lot of emphasis on personal freedom and much less trust, perhaps, of the central authorities and so on and so forth. Yeah. And of course, Singapore is a very different place where there's a high level of trust in the central government. Yeah. So maybe it's a strong point of contrast for you.
Oh yeah, certainly. It's clearly there's a very big contrast. I mean, in Singapore, the vaccination rates are like 90%. So I mean, the government makes it very difficult for you to do anything if you don't take the vaccine. So in that sense, you could say even those who do not want would have no choice. But I think broadly, my sensing is that there's much more. I wouldn't say much more, but certainly that level of trust in the government, and you don't see that deep divides. But again, this is just my own observation. I could be right, I could be wrong.
I think it's largely right, we have to see how the United States begins to build those bridges again. Right now, we're pretty divided as I can remember in the United States. But I'd like to, of course, tonight you're talking a little bit about China and its role. And of course, you and I have both been following China for a number of years. Just briefly highlight, what do you think is the different direction under Xi Jinping since he came to really power in 2012?
I think the biggest change in China's foreign policy is that it has certainly taken a more assertive stance. I think that much is clear, be it in terms of its relationship with the United States, relations in Southeast Asia, or with Western countries. Certainly a much more assertive, and I think linked to that is also the confident posture. So China is no longer, at least that's my view, China is no longer, it doesn't sort of say, okay, the West needs to recognize me in order for me to be considered. In the past, it constantly seeks sort of recognition and acknowledgement that what it is doing is good, especially from the West. But I think today, the way I see it at least, China is confident enough to say, okay, we don't need the West to sort of affirm us. We are confident as it is. We will do things our own way. If you like it, good. If you don't like it, well, we'll carry on doing what we are doing. So I think that has been one very big shift in Chinese foreign policy. And I think that's also very much part of, I guess, a growing Chinese identity, a more confident confident position of what it means to be Chinese.
Sure. I want to ask you a question because you're Singaporean.
Right.
And so, in a sense, you're a disinterested outsider looking at what is really a fairly severe conflict between the U.S. and China right now.
Yes.
And we know, for example, that within the U.S., China is seemed to be the aggressor. China seemed to be the one who's threatening to upset the liberal order. In China, however, it looks different. It looks like the U.S. is trying to keep them down.
Yes.
The Chinese argue that the U.S. is constantly raising false issues and is trying to prevent China from rising. From your perspective, and nobody's going to hold you to this, but let's just say from a third-party perspective, do you think there's some merit to the Chinese complaints?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the way I view it right now, they are very, it really, okay, perhaps if you take one step back, for a long time, America had this view that if we engage China, we sort of bring China into this liberal international order, which obviously the United States underwrites most of the rules and sort of leads this order, China will become like us. So that was the objective. Maybe not everybody agreed, but that was the broad objective. We wanted China to be like us. We wanted China to be part of this order so that notwithstanding some of the domestic problems, we could work with them. But the Chinese have clearly not lived up to American expectations of what China should be. So I think given that premise, the challenge now lies in how these two countries can sort of find common ground. I think that's the most difficult thing to find because almost on every important issue, and maybe even now not so important issue, both the United States and China disagree with one another. I would say it's also, and this is also part of what I've gathered in my Fulbright research, is that both countries view the world quite differently. The way I see it, and this might be generalizing, but what America generally views the world as, what is good for America is generally good for the world. It's good for the average Korean, average Japanese, average Singaporean. The Chinese don't see it that way. What is good, so they view it from a more party-centric perspective. What is good for the CCP is good for China. I doubt they think about what the average American thinks about their policies. So I think in that sense, you see you see the sort of divergence in their starting assumptions, and that makes it very difficult for these two countries to speak to one another.
Sure.
Yeah.
So different expectations, but what, from the Chinese perspective, does the U.S. do that seems provocative?
Well, I think the Chinese fundamentally would view the U.S. as containing it. They've learned the lessons from the Soviet Union, the collapse of Soviet Union, and they view this particularly, and this is borne out from many interviews we had with with Chinese policymakers, scholars, especially after the 2008 pivot to Asia policy by the Obama administration. The Chinese say, there you go, this pivot to Asia, it's obviously containing us. Otherwise, why that pivoting to Asia? And obviously, the United States don't see that way. They view it as part of this free and open Asia-Pacific or free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. Sure. But the Chinese view it as, well, you are just trying to contain us.
Right, and so in Chinese press and official Chinese announcements, you often, I would say almost always, hear them refer to the U.S. as bringing a Cold War mentality.
Yes.
And they say, we're not like that, right? We're much more progressive than you guys. You guys are stuck in the 1950s.
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, okay, take just a little bit of a different angle, because, of course, Singapore is right, in many ways the center of Southeast Asia. And one of the reasons I loved my time in Singapore is because it's a great place to study the rest of Asia and to get everybody else's perspective. How do Southeast Asian nations view this emerging world? Because they're in a sense caught in a pincher, right? Between the U.S. on one hand and China on the other hand, and they've got two big, powerful nations jockeying in their backyard. So how do the Southeast Asian nations?
That's a wonderful question. In fact, the Singapore Institute of Southeast Asian Studies just released a survey yesterday on the latest sort of perceptions towards U.S. and China. I probably could share it in our lecture later. I think in Southeast Asia, or if you want to talk about Singapore, I think broadly we recognize that competition between U.S. and China is here to stay. The challenge and looking at the United States is really questioning whether does the United States have enough staying power in Southeast Asia. I think that's a big question many countries in Southeast Asia are asking. I mean, during the Trump administration, the withdrawal from the TPP was certainly a signal that, okay, if America needs to do what it needs to do, it is willing to pull out from Southeast Asia. If it views that its interests are not if it views its interests as being distinct from what happens in Southeast Asia. So I think that has been one key question policymakers in Southeast Asia have been asking. How
committed the United States is to the region, right?
And one might also say, is the United States committed to Southeast Asia only because of China, or is it committed to Southeast Asia because it is interested in Southeast Asia? So I think that's another question that people are have been asking. On China, I think the general concern is certainly because of Chinese territorial claims in the South China Sea, and more broadly, it's kind of more assertive behavior. One needs to remember that if you take a plane out of Beijing, within 6 hours, you can be in every capital city in Southeast Asia. In the United States, you take a flight from Washington, D.C., in 6 hours, you're still on the West Coast. So I think it's very clear that China's backyard is Southeast Asia, and the Southeast Asian leaders are very aware that they have to deal with China in a much more visible player compared to the United States. I'm not saying the United States is invisible, but if you go in terms of just geography, distance, I'll give you an example. During the 2020-2021 coronavirus pandemic, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi repeatedly made many visits to Southeast Asian capitals, something that obviously he could do much more readily than the Secretary of State of the United States. So I think in that sense, China's presence is something that it's there. Yeah.
So it has to be accounted for. I'm remembering a couple of years ago, maybe, I think it was at the Shangri-La meeting, Prime Minister Lee Hsien-loong said, don't make us choose, right? Don't make us choose between China and the U.S. because you might not like the choice we make.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And maybe it reflects a little bit of that sense of we can't ignore China. We can't do everything you want.
Yep.
Yeah. So, well, we look forward to your talk tonight, and thank you for taking the time to come to Stillwater, and we hope that you enjoy it. You're going to have a wild Oklahoma weather swing while you're here.
Thank you.
So we're very grateful. So thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.